England belongs to me. A nation's pride, the dirty water of the river. What's up, Macha? Hey, what's up, ladies and gentlemen? Sorry it took me so long to come out with a review, but let me see. I usually try to do these things right after the fight so I can come at you fresh, but I was rather intoxicated after Saturday night, and I was rather busy with work, football and everything with Sunday. So here we are, man. I gotta say that was a hell of a card. I gotta say that was probably one of the best international cards. Definitely think one of the best ones from England. I think it was a very good job by the UFC as far as matchmaking. I think everything really delivered except the main event, of course. We'll get to that, but I gotta say, usually with the Ultimate Fighter and all this stuff going on with these English showcase cards, they usually have the English fighters fight local product. There's a couple of those here, and or the Ultimate Fighter winners fight some other debuting fighters to give them some real tests or something, some real load tests. But I gotta say, a lot of these guys, this was a real coming out party for English MMA, especially the English representation of the UFC. This was a real big coming out party because it was just really just one of the first times on one of these cards where the guys were just thrown into some really deep water, and for the most part, these guys just really delivered. As I was talking about the Ultimate Fighter winners, you got Ross Pearson and James Wilkes. James Wilkes, he took on Matt Brown. I kind of harken back to something I heard from Frank Shamrock when he was talking about Kimbo Slice. Kimbo, it's like Frank, you said you want to put him against a guy that can elevate him really high if he wins, or knock him down respectfully if he loses. Because if you lose, because that goes with Kimbo. It's like if he would have lost to losing to somebody like Roy Nelson ain't that big a deal. Hey, no problem. You fought, you tried, you lost. However, you lost to Seth Petrozelli, and that basically turned the whole entire organization on its head. But anyway, try to keep this within time and everything. That's what I got to say with what's his name, James Wilkes. He took on Bad Man Matt Brown. It was a very good fight. James was put in some trouble a lot of times, and and he hung in there. He fought, and he even got him in like a little Kimura or something. But Matt Brown was able to get out of his guard, get to the mount, and finish off the fight. That's another thing. James Wilkes put on a hell of a fight against a hell of a fighter, Matt Brown. Even though he did lose his first fight, coming out the Ultimate Fighter, that didn't really hurt him that bad because, hey, there's no shame in losing to Matt Brown. And I think that's a real good service by the UFC, just giving these kids some fair tests and throwing them in there into deep water, giving them a chance to prove themselves as fighters. And I think James Wilkes, he proved himself, and, he'll get another shot. Like some of those people, they build him up like they baby him a little bit, and they lose one of those tests, it's pretty much over, And same thing with Ross Pearson and Aaron Riley. Aaron Riley's a tough dude. I've seen him fight a few times. The guy ain't no joke. So putting him there with Ross Pearson, that's far from protection. Or no, putting Ross Pearson in there with him, that ain't protecting Ross. That's giving him a huge fight right off the bat. Ross Pearson dominated him, whooped his ass, and I got a whole lot of respect for him because, I didn't think he won his fight. I thought Andre Winter won that one. I thought just barely edged out, but who knows, whatever. I've been getting kind of tired of disagreeing with decisions anyway, if you know what I mean. But anyway, moving right along, Michael Bisping coming off that devastating KO by Dan Henderson. Michael Bisping, he's been a topic of much derision for much of his UFC career, and it even intensified. He was written off after that Dan Henderson fight. But to come in there against a dangerous fighter in Dennis Kang, a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt with heavy hands, Michael Bisping, he just really bounced back in a good way. That being said, I didn't personally like. I didn't like Mike was making the same mistakes he made against Dan Henderson. He was still circling into that right, and he got caught really bad. Now Now, that being said, he got caught really hard, but when that hit the ground, he really showed his skill and his discipline, and he really impressed me with his ability to get in the guard. Like, a lot of people try to make excuses because Dennis King has been criticized for a lot of mental mistakes and screwing up. He didn't screw up this one. He didn't choke. Michael Bisping was just a better fighter, and he beat his ass. And that's was basically what happened. King had him exactly where he wanted him, got in his guard, he passed Mike Bisping's guard, mounted him a couple times. Bisping did exactly what he had to do, hip escaped, got out of there, got his guard back, and stayed out of trouble. He stuffed all of Dennis King's attempts to ground and pound him. Didn't really take any damage. Nothing really happened from half guard to side mount to to mount. He was able to stay out of trouble, and that is just that is not a knock on Dennis King, because Dennis King has credentials. Michael Bisping hung with him. That is just a great show by Michael Bisping in the first round, staying out of trouble, despite being in a lot of trouble, Then in the second round, he took him down and just ground and pounded him, beat him into paste. And the same thing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and he couldn't do nothing against Michael Bisping. People he didn't wilt either. Dennis King didn't wilt. He hung in there, tried his best to fight Michael Bisping off. He just got hurt really bad. And that's Michael Bisping's fault, not Dennis King. So I think this fight will go a long way towards giving Michael Bisping the respect he deserves. He looked really bad in his last fight, but he really showed the real Mike in this one. He's a really good fighter. He's not mediocre like a lot of people say. And, I try not to sound angry about this because I had to put up with a lot of shit for a long time about Mike, but Mike's a great fighter. Not great. I don't see him beating Silva anytime soon, but he definitely deserves a little bit more respect than he's given, and I hope this fight, people start, looking at him in a different light, so this guy is a real fighter. And then speaking of a real fighter, I'm talking about Dan the Outlaw Hardy, because I was a little questionable about him. I mean, his first few fights, he beat a young Rory Markham. Rory Markham, we don't know a whole lot about him yet. He did have a great KO victory before that, but Dan really handled him really good. He had a close fights with Akihiro Gono. That was a split decision, but I thought he clearly won that fight. And he had a very close, could go either way, depending on how you look at it, with Marcus Davis. I think in all his fights he showed some real potent striking. However, you weren't sure how dangerous he could be, especially, but he was really thrown, like I said, like all his compatriots, he was thrown into the deep water Saturday. He took on Mike Swick. Mike Swick is on his way to a title shot. He's supposed to fight, let's see, what's his name, Martin Campbell, but he had to pull out of that due to injury, and Dan Hardy stepped up, man. And he stepped up in a major way in the ring. And he just, he showed some very good strike. He made Mike Swick want to grapple. And I think Dan Hardy could have easily finished this fight a number of times if he would have kept distance and not clinched so much. Because I saw him get control of the clinch a lot. He's shown that he's comfortable taking the fight anywhere it goes. But his game is striking, and he looked really good. And he proved a lot to me, because I didn't think he'd be able to hang with Mike Swick. I thought it'd be a little too soon for him. And he came. That's another thing I respect him for, and I respect Mike for. Both those guys just really showed their best performance. They gave their best performance at the biggest stage, at the most important time of their career. Mike didn't show so good last time, but being able to bounce back from that just really shows the kind of character that these guys have. Dan Hardy, just stepping up, to take on Mike Swick, and just taking it to Mike Swick and whooping his ass, to get himself a shot at GSP. Just the whole way he's carried himself throughout his UFC run, and the way he just proved it at the biggest times. I mean, that just really just shows a lot to me, and I have a lot of respect for all those competitors. I didn't have a whole lot of respect for Brandon Vera's performance. He was the wild card coming into this. I know what Randy Couture is going to do. I know what he wants. I know he's going to do exactly what it takes for him to win the fight. However, what my knock against Randy was that it was always seems to be more about what his opponent does or doesn't do than what he does. I mean, he comes to fight, but if his opponent doesn't underestimate him, he can usually take him out. And that's why I saw Brandon Vera here. He had the wrestling to stop Randy's takedowns, to stay out of trouble, and to keep it in his world. And and he had the striking that was dangerous enough to take Randy out. However, he did not. He let it hang around to decision, and when the decision came, it didn't roll his way. I personally thought he won the fight. I thought he won the second and third rounds, but that doesn't matter. Decisioning Randy Couture wasn't enough. He needed to knock him out, and he failed to do that. So, sit on the corner and cry, son. If you're not going to bring it then, when are you going to bring it? That's basically all I had to say about the card. I really enjoyed it, and I'll see y'all later.